Hello and welcome back to An Old Man Watches, where today I'm going to be talking about three werewolf-themed, or at least werewolf-adjacent movies from the 1960s and 1970s. The first is the 1961 offering Werewolf in a Girl's Dormitory. This Italo-Austrian film, originally released as Lycanthropus, is actually much less lurid than its English language title suggests. I mean, unless you have a real thing for neck-to-knee nightgowns. The movie begins with a new staff member arriving at a women's reformatory. As he's a reasonably handsome man, his arrival attracts considerable attention from the inmates. The new staff member is, in fact, a disgraced doctor who had a patient die in mysterious circumstances. It's fortunate for him that the director of the reformatory believes strongly in second chances, or this new doctor might not have been able to find work at all. Of course, the presence of a werewolf at the establishment means that the career opportunity does come with some significant complications. The second movie is Beast of the Yellow Night from 1971. Shortly after the end of the Second World War, a wicked man sells his soul to the devil in order to save himself from death. There is, of course, a price to pay. Specifically, the man's consciousness now inhabits the bodies of other people, those, in fact, on the verge of death. He must then tempt the people that they know in order to succumb to their worst impulses. So, he inhabits a dying person and gets that dying person's friends and relatives to do bad things. Now, 20 years of this is enough to weary even the most hardened of villains, especially when his intended victims prove to be fundamentally decent people. This tempts him to try and circumvent the devil's plans for him, which, as you might imagine, doesn't sit too well with old Nick, who expresses his displeasure by cursing our protagonist with a werewolf-like transformation. Presumably, if he gets back to doing his job, this will stop, but that means harming a woman he has come to care for. And meanwhile, of course, the police are starting to link his new identity with that of the bestial killer stalking the streets. Finally, we have Werewolf Woman from 1976. This is the movie that you might have expected Werewolf in a Girl's Dormitory to be. It's a nasty bit of sleaze full of violent sex and gratuitous nudity. The main character is Daniela, a woman who was sexually assaulted at the age of 13, which has, as you might expect, left her with some deep issues in regard to sex. And also, much less explicably, with an obsession over an ancestor of hers who was executed as a werewolf. Was the woman a werewolf? Is Daniela a werewolf? That's what the movie's kind of about, really. So, this is another of those occasional videos where I look at multiple thematically linked films rather than at a single movie. This generally happens either because I don't think any of the films has enough worth talking about, or because they share such similar talking points that making separate videos would mean regurgitating all of the same stuff over and over again. This time it's a little from column A and a little from column B. Beast of the Yellow Night might actually have had enough to talk about to fill a video at a stretch. The other two films, meanwhile, definitely would not, so I've decided to roll them all together into this one video. But let's get stuck in. And let's start with the dialogue, which is a notable weakness of all three films. I was going to start by complaining that real people don't talk like the characters in these films, but of course, one of the ironies of good dialogue is that it is unnatural. Fiction generally presents dialogue as neat, ordered, back-and-forth engagements in which characters wait their turn and then deliver clear, grammatically correct lines, without recursions, diversions, pauses, or stumbles. And if you've listened to my videos, you know people don't talk like that, because I make mistakes and stop and pause and say, Real conversations frequently involve people doing that. They talk over one another, they lose their train of thought, they insert meaningless sounds like ums, and so on. Now, of course, this is one case where the artificiality of movie dialogue is an improvement on reality. It's a lot easier to follow the conversation between a half dozen characters in a film than it would be for 6 real-life people, as anyone who sat in a Teams meeting would know. And, that wouldn't be a bad thing if that was what was happening in this movie, or these movies, but it's not what's happening in these movies. In these movies, characters are delivering lines such as far as you're concerned, I am and can only ever be whoever or whatever you think I am, which is one of the gems offered to us in Beast of the Yellow Night. What does that even mean? Now, none of these movies have big budgets, and they've got the unreliable acting quality you expect of such limited resources, but in all fairness to the actors, I'm not sure anyone could gracefully and convincingly deliver a line like that, no matter how talented they might be. And while definitely standout moment for incoherent dialogue, it's definitely not unusual in being bad dialogue, with all three films featuring a lot of clumsily worded, artificial-sounding exposition masquerading as conversation, and exchanges where characters deliver lines that don't actually seem to be responses to the line preceding them. All three films also feature some rather clumsy plotting moments. Werewolf in a Girl's Dormitory is particularly notable in this regard. It's immediately obvious who the werewolf is, and the script's flailing attempts to cast suspicion on various other characters only serve to make it even more obvious. Werewolf Woman, meanwhile, suffers a lot from the fact that character actions appear to be driven more by the goal of get us to the next bit of nudity as fast as possible than by any particular interest in fancy things like cause and effect or plausibility. It's the kind of movie where cops immediately leap to theories like her ancestor's spirit is possessing her and compelling her to kill these people, which is later topped off with the eye-watering hubris of the movie's ending, where text cards earnestly assure the viewer that both A, the names have been changed, and B, no resemblance to real persons is intended, without any apparent concern over the fact that these two statements are contradictions. The plot of Beast of the Yellow Night is a cut above the other two on the whole, but it does rather stumble at the last. I think I can see what they were going for with their conclusion, and I do give them points for not having some clumsy expository conversation to explicitly state it, but I don't think it really quite gels, perhaps at least in part because it comes rather abruptly at the end of an overly long and not terribly interesting chase sequence. A final thing that these films have in common is that they are very much products of their time. This is perhaps most notable in Werewolf Woman, which is the kind of sleazy softcore skin flick that has "you'll get to see naked ladies" as pretty much its entire marketing strategy. Now, that was a workable strategy back in the 70s and perhaps even as recently as 20 years ago, but it no longer is. Today, premium cable TV shows routinely show as much skin, generally much higher acting and quality acting and production, and of course there's easy access to far more explicit material on the internet. Sex may sell, but this kind of stuff is well past its use-by date. Neither of the other two films is specifically oriented to cash in on a particular niche like that, but they are both in the make it cheaply enough and it should turn a profit mold that was key to independent film production of the era. Again, time has closed the window on such products. The contraction of the modern cinema market into being pretty much entirely new release multiplexes has cut off their main avenues for exposure, and while streaming platforms offer a way to be seen, the sheer amount of content on those platforms makes it hard to stand out, or even to be found. Like, if you don't know the movie's name, how are you going to find it? And if you don't know the movie's name, why are you going to be searching for it? Beast of the Yellow Night is also particularly a product of its time because of its blatant disregard for health and safety considerations, such as the scene where a bunch of extras are seen running around in a burning cane field. And because of its commercial success, it prompted producer Roger Corman to make a number of films in the Philippines in the immediately following years. These included some genuine grindhouse classics, such as Black Mama, White Mama, so that's definitely a point in this film's favour, in my opinion. Ultimately, I don't think any of these three films are worth actively seeking out. Beast of the Yellow Night is the best of the three by quite some margin, but even then it only manages to scrape its way to not actively terrible. Next time, sometimes there are movies that are genuinely deeply flawed in any number of ways, and yet they are still much beloved. For many people, that movie would be Highlander. For me, it's the bombastic buffoonery of that other 80s Queen soundtracked science fantasy, Flash Gordon. He'll save every one of us. But that's next time. Until then, thanks for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed it.